I'll leave once I'm ahead. I promised. I left without gas money to drive home. My name is Nathaniel. I'm a maintenance guy who fixes other people's broken things for a living. 3 days ago, I had a paycheck, a plan, and 72 hours to save my home. Today I'm staring at an empty gas tank and wondering how I'll explain this to the woman I love. It started with an eviction notice and simple math turned $200 into enough to keep our apartment. The casino felt like a solution, not a trap. I knew the odds. I had a system. I was different from the others sitting at those tables. The cards were kind at first, then cruel, then desperate. Hours disappeared. Phone calls went unanswered. My girlfriend thought I was solving our problem while I was making it so much worse. I kept saying, "One more hand," until I had no hands left to play. Let me take you back to that Tuesday morning when everything started falling apart, and the moment I convinced myself that gambling was the answer. When you're drowning in bills and running out of time, how do you tell the difference between a life preserver and an anchor? The basement at Riverside Gardens was a swimming pool when I got there Tuesday morning. 3 inches of murky water covered the concrete floor, and the busted water heater sat in the middle like a dead whale. Mrs. Rodriguez stood at the top of the stairs, yelling in Spanish and English about her ruined Christmas decorations floating around down there. "Nathaniel, you need to get this fixed today," my supervisor Rick said over the phone. His voice had that tight edge it gets when the property management company starts breathing down his neck about overtime costs. They're threatening to call another contractor. I waded into the mess wearing my oldest work boots. The water was cold and smelled like rust and mildew. 12 years I've been doing this job, fixing broken things for people who mostly saw me as an inconvenience. Leaky faucets, busted air conditioners, toilets that wouldn't stop running. Problems that had solutions if you knew what you were doing. The old water heater was a 40-gallon unit, probably installed when I was in high school. Heavy as a car engine and twice as stubborn. I had to disconnect the gas line, drain what was left in the tank, and somehow wrestle the thing up those narrow stairs without killing myself or Mrs. Rodriguez. "My daughter's quinceañera dress was in that box," she said, pointing at a soggy cardboard container floating near the furnace. $1,500, ruined. I nodded and kept working. What was I supposed to say? That her dress cost more than I made in a month? That I understood exactly how it felt to watch something important get destroyed by forces outside your control? By noon, my back was screaming and I was soaked through my jacket. The new water heater weighed 200 pounds, and the delivery guys had dropped it at the curb instead of bringing it to the basement like they were supposed to. I had to move it myself, inch by inch, using a dolly that kept getting stuck in the gravel. Rick called again at 2. "How's it going?" "It's going," I said, wiping sweat from my forehead. "Be done by 5, maybe 6. Property manager wants it done by 4. They've got new tenants looking at the unit upstairs tomorrow." The pressure in my chest tightened. Everything was always urgent for someone else, but my own life kept falling apart in slow motion. 3 months behind on rent. Sarah working double shifts at the diner just to keep us afloat. Bills stacked on the kitchen counter like a house of cards waiting to collapse that I worked faster, cutting corners I probably shouldn't have cut. The gas connections had to be perfect. One mistake, and someone could die. But I also knew that taking my time meant another lecture from Rick about efficiency and cost control. Mrs. Rodriguez brought me a cup of coffee around 3. It was strong and sweet, the way my grandmother used to make it. "You have kids?" she asked. "Not yet. Hoping to, someday." She smiled for the first time all day. "Kids are expensive, but they're worth it." I thought about Sarah and our conversations about starting a family. How we decided to wait until we were more stable financially. How that day kept getting pushed further and further into the future. The job took until 6:30. By the time I fired up the new water heater and checked all the connections, the sun was setting and Mrs. Rodriguez was making dinner. The smell of rice and beans drifted down from her kitchen, reminding me that I hadn't eaten since breakfast. Rick called as I was loading my tools. "Finally." "How much overtime?" 2.5 hours. He sighed. "Try to keep it under 2 next time, okay? The margins on these jobs are already tight." I drove home thinking about margins. How everything in my life seemed to be operating on margins these days. Not enough time, not enough money, not enough energy to keep all the pieces from falling apart. The side job I'd planned for that evening, installing a ceiling fan for Mrs. Chun down the street, had to be canceled. That was another $120 I wouldn't see this week. Sarah would ask about it when she got home from her shift, and I'd have to explain why we were still short on the rent money that Sarah's car wasn't in the driveway when I pulled up. She was probably picking up another double shift at Bernie's Diner, smiling at customers who left $2 tips on $30 checks. We'd been together for 3 years, and I'd never seen her complain about anything. She just worked harder when things got tough. I sat in my truck for a minute, looking at our duplex on Maple Street. Paint peeling around the windows, front steps that creaked when you walked on them, a yard that needed mowing but would have to wait until I could afford to fix the lawnmower. It wasn't much, but it was ours. Or it would be, if I could figure out how to catch up on the rent. The orange paper looked like a traffic cone taped to our front door, bright enough to see from the street, impossible to ignore or pretend it was something else. Notice to quit and pay rent or surrender possession of premises. The words were printed in bold black letters that seemed to get bigger the longer I stared at them. 72 hours to pay $1,847 in back rent or face legal proceedings. I unstuck the notice carefully, as if removing it gently might somehow change what it said. The paper was crisp and official, with our names, mine and Sarah's, spelled correctly at the top. No mistake, no mix-up with another tenant. This was real. Inside, the apartment felt smaller than usual. The ceiling fan I'd been meaning to fix hung crooked over the living room, one blade bent from the time I tried to straighten it with pliers. The wallpaper in the kitchen was peeling near the sink, and there was a water stain on the bathroom ceiling from the upstairs neighbor's leak 6 months ago. I spread the bills across the kitchen table like I was dealing cards. Electric bill, $127, 2 weeks overdue. Gas, $89, past due. Car insurance, $156, canceled if not paid by Friday. Phone, $78, already showing service restrictions. The math was simple and brutal. My paycheck Friday would be $680 after taxes. Sarah's tips from the diner might bring in another $300 if she had good nights. That was $980 total, against the $1,847 we owed just for rent. Never mind the other bills, never mind food. Never mind the fact that my truck needed new tires and was making a grinding noise every time I braked. I found a calculator in the junk drawer and ran the numbers again, hoping I'd made a mistake. The numbers didn't change. They never did. Sarah's note was stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a chili pepper. Picking up Angela's shift at Bernie's. Home by midnight. Love you. She'd drawn a little heart next to her name. 3 years we'd been together, and she still drew hearts on her notes, even when the bills were piling up and my mood was darker than the circles under my eyes. She worked her regular shift at the insurance office downtown, then drove straight to the diner 4 nights a week. Never complained, never made me feel like it was my fault we were struggling, but it was my fault. I was the one who'd gotten hurt on the job 6 months ago, thrown out my back lifting a water heater that should have required 2 people. 6 weeks of workers' comp that paid half my usual salary. Just enough to fall behind on everything and not enough to catch up when I went back to work. I sat in my recliner, the one piece of furniture we'd bought new, back when I thought we were moving in the right direction, and stared at the eviction notice. The paper was smooth and official, printed on letterhead from Hartwell Property Management, with a phone number and office hours listed at the bottom. The television was on. Some game show where contestants spun a wheel and won money for answering questions. The host was congratulating a woman from Ohio who'd just won $15,000 for knowing the capital of Montana. She was crying and hugging her family, like this money would change everything for them. I thought about calling Sarah at the diner, but what would I tell her? That I'd let us get this far behind without finding a solution? That her extra shifts and careful budgeting hadn't been enough to make up for my mistakes? Outside, I could hear the Ramirez kids playing in their yard next door. Their father worked construction, probably made less than I did, but they always seemed to have money for things like bicycles and birthday parties. Maybe they were just better at managing what they had. Maybe they didn't have someone like me making the decisions. The game show ended, and the evening news came on. Stories about the stock market and political campaigns and a casino opening in the next county. Rich people getting richer, poor people buying lottery tickets, everyone looking for an angle that would change their luck. I'd never been inside a casino. Grew up thinking they were for people who didn't understand math, who couldn't see that the house always wins in the end. But sitting there with an eviction notice in my hands and no clear way forward, I started to understand why people took those kinds of chances. The reporter was interviewing the casino manager, a man in an expensive suit who talked about job creation and entertainment value. Behind him, you could see flashing lights and people sitting at slot machines, feeding money into the machines like they were buying hope by the dollar. Sarah's key turned in the lock at 11:45. Earlier than expected, which usually meant slow night at the diner. I folded the eviction notice and slipped it into my pocket. "How was your day?" she asked, kissing my forehead before heading to the kitchen. "Fine. Long. How were tips tonight?" "Okay. $43. Could have been better." She moved around the kitchen, putting away dishes, wiping counters that were already clean. These small routines that kept our life feeling normal even when everything was falling apart. That I wanted to tell her about the notice. I wanted to ask her what we were going to do, but the words stayed stuck in my throat, and I let her keep believing we had more time than we did. Murphy's Gas and Go sat on the corner of Oak and 3rd Street. One of those combination gas stations and convenience stores that sold everything from motor oil to hot dogs that had been spinning on rollers since morning. I'd stopped there every day for 3 years, buying coffee and lottery tickets. Sarah played with her tip money. Wednesday evening, I needed dinner supplies but couldn't afford much. Bread, peanut butter, maybe some soup if it was on sale. The kind of shopping you do when every dollar has to stretch until it screams. How was working the register? Same as always. 60-something years old with thick glasses and hands that moved like he'd been counting change since before I was born. His wife had some kind of chronic illness. I'd heard him on the phone with doctors, talking about medications and insurance coverage. Evening, Nathaniel. How's Sarah doing? Good. Working hard. I set a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter on the counter. The scratch-off display was right there next to the register, impossible to ignore. Rows of colorful tickets with names like Cash Bonanza and Lucky Sevens and Money Tree. Sarah had bought a $5 ticket here last week and won $20. Spent it on groceries and acted like she'd beaten the system. "Those Lucky Sevens are paying out good today," Hal said, following my gaze. "Sold 3 winners already this shift." I had $23 in my wallet. 20 was supposed to go toward groceries, 3 for gas. But standing there, looking at those tickets, I started thinking about Sarah's win. How excited she'd been, counting out those $20 bills like they were $100 bills. What if I bought one ticket? If I lost $5, we'd eat peanut butter sandwiches for dinner, and I'd pump $3 less gas. If I won something, anything, it would be more money than we had this morning. "Give me one of those Lucky Sevens." Hal peeled a ticket from the roll and slid it across the counter. The ticket was glossy and bright, with silver coating over the numbers you scratched off. It felt substantial in my hands, like it might actually contain something valuable. I paid for my groceries and the ticket, then walked out to my truck to scratch it off. The parking lot was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. The first number was a 7, then another 7, then a third. 3 sevens in a row. Meant $50. I stared at the ticket for a full minute, convinced I was reading it wrong. Checked the winning combinations printed on the back, checked the numbers again. 3 sevens. $50. More money than I'd seen in one place in weeks. Back inside, Hal verified the ticket and counted out 5 $10 bills from the register. The money felt different from the crumpled ones and 5s I usually carried. Crisp and clean, like it had never been touched by worry or need. "Nice hit," Hal said. "Want to try another one?" For a second, I considered it. If one ticket could win $50, maybe another could win more. But that was the kind of thinking that got people in trouble. I'd gotten lucky once. Smart thing was to take the money and go home. I bought the groceries I'd planned to buy, plus a few extras we hadn't been able to afford in weeks. Ground beef for tacos, ice cream for dessert, a bottle of wine Sarah liked, but we only bought for special occasions. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Lucky, like maybe things were starting to turn around for us. $50 wasn't enough to solve our big problems, but it was enough to remember what winning felt like. Sarah's car was in the driveway when I got home. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop, probably looking at the bank account and trying to figure out how to make our money last until Friday. "You're home early," I said, setting the groceries on the counter. "Slow night at the office. Dr. Morrison only had 2 appointments." She looked up from the computer screen. "What's all this?" "Thought we deserved something nice for dinner." She smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her in weeks. "Where did the money come from?" "Found a 20 in my toolbox." Must have been there for months. The lie came easily, which should have worried me more than it did. But watching Sarah unpack groceries and plan a real dinner for the first time in weeks felt worth a small deception that we made tacos together, standing side by side in our narrow kitchen. And for an hour, I almost forgot about the eviction notice folded in my pocket. The $50 win felt like a sign that our luck was changing, that maybe there were solutions to our problems I hadn't considered yet. After dinner, we shared the wine and watched a movie on television. Sarah fell asleep against my shoulder halfway through, and I sat there listening to her breathe, thinking about the scratch-off ticket and how easy it had been to turn $5 into $50. I didn't mention the eviction notice. I told myself I was protecting her from worry, giving myself time to figure out a solution. But really, I was protecting the feeling that maybe, for once, I had found a way to fix something that seemed unfixable. The $45 in profit sat in my wallet like a secret. Tomorrow, I decided, I'd see if lightning could strike twice. Thursday evening, I found myself back at Murphy's. Not for groceries this time. I told myself I was buying cigarettes for a job site. Even though I'd quit smoking 2 years ago, Hal looked up from his crossword puzzle when I walked in. Back again. Sarah send you for something. Just cigarettes. I grabbed a pack of Marlboros from behind the counter. The kind I used to smoke when work stress got bad. You know, Hal said, ringing up the cigarettes. We got that video poker machine in the back if you're feeling lucky again. Better odds than scratch-offs, and you can play your strategy. I'd noticed the machine before, but never paid attention. It sat in the corner near the beer cooler, looking like a small television with buttons. The screen showed playing cards and flashing text that said, "Insert bills here." How's it work? Like poker, but against the machine. You get 5 cards, decide which ones to keep, get new cards for the ones you throw away. Pair of jacks or better wins money. It sounded more skill-based than scratch-offs. Less like gambling, more like a game where knowing what you were doing might actually matter. I fed my $50 win into the machine. The bills disappeared with a mechanical whir, and credits appeared on the screen. 50. I bet 1 credit on the first hand. 0.5 cards appeared. Jack of hearts. Jack of clubs. 4 of diamonds. 9 of spades. 7 of hearts. I kept the jacks and discarded the rest. The new cards came up. Jack of spades. 10 of clubs. Queen of hearts. 3 jacks. The machine played a little tune and my credits jumped to 56. For the next hour, I played dollar hands and learned the rhythm of the machine. The satisfying chunk when credits accumulated, the brief pause before new cards appeared, the way winning hands lit up the screen with flashing colors. It felt more honest than scratch-offs. I could see the cards, make decisions, use my brain instead of just hoping. By 8 o'clock, I'd turned my $50 into $127. The machine spit out bills in 20s and 5s, more money than I'd held in months. My hands shook slightly as I folded the cash into my wallet. Hal watched me count the money. Nice run. Machine's been cold all week until today. Driving home, I felt like I'd discovered something important. This wasn't random luck like scratch-offs. This was skill combined with opportunity. I understood poker basics from watching it on television, knew which hands beat which, could calculate odds in my head. Sarah was asleep when I got home. I put the cigarettes in the junk drawer and hid the money in my toolbox, wrapped in an old rag behind my socket wrenches. Tomorrow was Friday, payday and rent deadline. If I could turn $127 into more, maybe our problems weren't as impossible as they seemed. I lay awake next to Sarah, listening to her breathe, thinking about the machine and the cards and the way winning felt. Like I'd finally found something I was good at besides fixing other people's broken things. The eviction notice was still in my jacket pocket, but it felt less urgent now. Less like a death sentence and more like a problem that might have a solution I hadn't considered before. Friday after work, I cashed my paycheck and drove straight to Murphy's. My plan was simple. Take the $127 from yesterday and see if I could push it higher. We needed $1,847 for rent, and Sarah's diner money might bring us to $980 total. That left $867 to find somewhere else. The video poker machine was empty when I arrived. Hal nodded from behind the counter, busy with the evening rush of people buying gas and lottery tickets for the weekend drawing. I fed in my $127 and started playing. The machine felt different today, colder, less cooperative. My first 10 hands lost more than they won. Pair of 4s, no pair, jack high, nothing. The credits dropped steadily. 115, 108, 95, 89. This was the test, I told myself. Anyone could get lucky once. Staying calm during a cold streak separated real players from people who just threw money away. I increased my bets to 2 credits per hand, figuring bigger bets would help me recover faster. Got dealt a potential straight, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of different suits. Kept all 5 cards, hoping for any 5 or a jack to make a straight. The machine gave me a 4. Down to 73 credits. Then 61. Then 54. The frustration built in my chest like pressure in a water heater about to burst. The machine had been so generous yesterday, giving me exactly what I needed when I needed it. Today it felt like it was deliberately working against me. I hit 3 kings on a 3-credit bet, and my balance jumped back to 78. The relief was immediate and intense, like coming up for air after being underwater too long. This was why I'd stayed. The machine was just testing my patience. But then another cold streak. 78 became 65, then 53, then 41. By the time Hal announced closing time at 10 o'clock, I was down to $73, still ahead of my original $50 investment, but trending in the wrong direction. Machine giving you trouble tonight? Hal asked as I cashed out. Just a cold run. Happens in poker. You know, there's a casino about 40 minutes down Highway 78. River Bell. They got real video poker machines there, not these little convenience store things. Better payouts, more variety. I'd driven past the River Bell exit countless times, never thinking it applied to me. Casinos were for people who didn't understand money, who couldn't see that the odds always favored the house. But driving home with $73 in my pocket, I started thinking about Hal's comment. Maybe the problem wasn't my strategy or my luck. Maybe it was the machine itself. A convenience store poker game probably had worse odds than the real thing. Lower payouts, tighter programming. At home, Sarah was counting our combined money at the kitchen table. My paycheck, her tips from the week, everything we had between us and eviction. $980, she said. We're still short $867. I sat down across from her, looking at the small stack of bills and the eviction notice she'd found in my jacket pocket. Why didn't you tell me about this? I was trying to figure out a solution first. We're a team, Nathaniel. We figure things out together. She was right, and I felt the weight of keeping secrets from the person I loved most. But I also felt the weight of being the one responsible for fixing our problems. Sarah worked 2 jobs and never complained. The least I could do was find a way to make up the difference. I'll call the property manager tomorrow, she said. Maybe they'll take partial payment and let us pay the rest next week. I nodded, but I was thinking about the River Bell Casino and Hal's comment about better machines. Real video poker with real odds, where skill might actually matter more than luck. Saturday morning, I called Hartwell Property Management and spoke to a tired-sounding woman named Mrs. Patterson. She was polite but firm. They needed the full $1,847 by 5 o'clock Monday, or eviction proceedings would begin Tuesday morning. We can accept a money order or cashier's check, she said. Personal checks require a 10-day hold, which puts you past the deadline. I hung up and stared at our kitchen table covered with bills and calculations. Sarah had left early for a double shift at the diner, hoping weekend tips might bring in an extra $100. But even if she had the best day of her life, we'd still be hundreds short. The math was brutal and simple. We had $980. We needed $1,847. That left $867 to find somewhere else, and we had 48 hours to find it. I'd already called everyone I could think of. My brother in Dallas was unemployed. Sarah's sister in Phoenix was barely making ends meet with 2 kids. My parents had helped us 6 months ago when I hurt my back, and I couldn't ask again. The want ads in Sunday's paper offered nothing that paid immediately. Construction jobs that started next week, restaurant positions that required experience I didn't have. Even if I found something today, I wouldn't see money for 2 weeks. That's when I remembered Hal's comment about the River Bell Casino. Real video poker machines with better odds and higher payouts. I pulled out a calculator and ran numbers based on my Murphy's experience. If I could turn the $200 we'd set aside for groceries into $1,067, we could make rent. That was a 433% return, which sounded impossible until I remembered hitting 3 jacks yesterday and winning 6 credits on a 1-credit bet. A 600% return on that single hand. The plan felt logical when I wrote it down. Drive to River Bell Sunday afternoon. Find the best video poker machines with the highest payouts. Play carefully and systematically until I reached $1,267 total. Come home with enough money to pay rent and buy groceries that I called my supervisor Rick and told him I had food poisoning. Wouldn't be in until Tuesday, maybe Wednesday. He wasn't happy about the short notice, but I'd never called in sick before, so he didn't argue. Sarah texted me around noon. Good day so far. $73 in tips and lunch rush hasn't started yet. How are you feeling? I texted back, still sick. Staying in bed today. Love you. Another lie, but a small one. By tomorrow evening, it wouldn't matter. I'd either have solved our problem or made it worse. But at least I'd have tried something instead of just sitting there, watching our life fall apart. The River Bell Casino was 43 minutes down Highway 78. I'd driven past the exit sign hundreds of times without ever taking it. The billboard advertised loosest slots in 3 counties and Vegas-style action. Today, I was going to find out what that meant. I showered and put on my best jeans and a clean shirt. If I was going to walk into a casino for the first time in my life, I wanted to look like I belonged there, like someone who understood what he was doing. The $200 sat in my wallet like a secret. Grocery money transformed into investment capital, our last chance disguised as our biggest risk. The River Bell Casino was bigger than I'd imagined from the highway. A sprawling building with a parking lot that stretched toward the horizon, filled with cars and RVs and tour buses. The entrance was all glass and chrome, with fountains and landscaping that looked expensive. Inside, the noise hit me first. Electronic music mixed with the sound of slot machines, coins dropping, people talking and laughing. The carpet was thick and colorful, designed to hide stains and muffle footsteps. The ceiling was low and covered in lights that made everything feel like perpetual evening. That I'd expected the afternoon crowd to be mostly elderly people. But the casino was full of all kinds. Construction workers still in their coveralls. Women my mother's age feeding dollar bills into slot machines. Young couples sharing drinks and playing table games. Everyone looked comfortable here, like they belonged. I felt like an intruder, obvious in my nervousness and inexperience. The video poker section was near the back, past rows of slot machines with names like Wheel of Fortune and Lucky Sevens. The machines were bigger and brighter than Hal's convenience store game. With cushion chairs and cup holders and buttons that looked substantial, I found a machine advertising 9-6 jacks or better, with payouts listed on the screen. A full house paid 9 credits for every 1 bet. A flush paid 6. At Murphy's, those same hands paid 8 and 5. Better odds. Just like Hal had said, that I fed my $200 into the machine and watched the credits appear. 200. The bills disappeared with a smooth mechanical sound, much quieter than the convenience store machine. I started with 1 credit hands. Just like at Murphy's. The first hand gave me a pair of queens, an automatic winner. 2 credits back on a 1 credit bet. The machine made a pleasant chiming sound. The next hand was a bust, but the third gave me 2 pair. 5 credits. Then another bust. Then a straight that paid 20 credits on a 4 credit bet. Within 30 minutes, I was up to 340 credits. The plan was working exactly as I'd hoped. The machine felt more responsive than Murphy's, the cards more random, the payouts more generous. A cocktail waitress stopped by my machine. "Can I get you something to drink, honey?" She was about my age, with blonde hair and a uniform that looked like it came from a 1950s diner. Her name tag said Brenda. "Beer would be great." "Coming right up." "What kind?" "Whatever's on tap." She brought me a Budweiser in a plastic cup, ice cold and free. I'd never been in a place that gave away beer to customers. The gesture felt generous, welcoming, like the casino wanted me to succeed. I tipped her $2 from my pocket change and kept playing. The beer relaxed me, made the decisions feel easier. Keep the ace and jack, discard the rest. Hold the pair of 9s. Draw to the straight. By 4 o'clock, I'd reached 420 credits. The $200 had become $420 in 2 hours, putting me ahead of schedule. At this rate, I'd hit my $1,067 target well before closing time. The machine felt like a partner instead of an opponent. It gave me good cards when I played smart, rewarded patience with occasional big hands. This wasn't gambling. This was skill-based gaming where knowledge and strategy actually mattered. I increased my bets to 5 credits per hand. reasoning that bigger bets would get me to my goal faster. The second beer made everything feel easier. Brenda brought it without me asking, just set it down next to my machine with a smile that made me feel like a regular customer instead of a first-timer that I was playing 5 credit hands now, which meant each decision mattered 5 times as much. Win 5 credits and you'd actually gain $25. Lose 5 credits and you'd drop the same amount. The bigger bets made the game more exciting. The wins felt more substantial, the losses more meaningful. When I hit a flush on a 5 credit bet, the machine paid 30 credits, $150 in one hand. More money than I made in a day at work, but the machine was running colder now. Long stretches where I'd get nothing playable, 7 high, jack high, no pairs worth keeping. My credit total drifted downward. For 120, 385, 340, 295 that the frustration built slowly, like water behind a dam. Yesterday at Murphy's, the machine had tested my patience too. This was just part of the game. Cold streaks followed by hot streaks. Losses followed by wins that I increased my bets to 10 credits per hand. If the machine was going to be stingy, I needed bigger payouts when it finally cooperated. The strategy worked for a while. I hit 3 tens on a 10 credit bet and won 50 credits, $250. The total jumped back to 380, and I felt vindicated. The machine had just been testing my resolve, but then another cold streak. 10 credit losses adding up faster than 5 credit losses. 380 became 320, then 260, then 220. Other players moved in and out of the machines around me, but I stayed focused on my goal. Some won quickly and left. Others lost their stake and walked away looking defeated. I was different. I had a plan and the patience to see it through. An older man at the machine next to mine hit something big, bells and lights and credits streaming across his screen. He hooped and called his wife over, showed her the total, 1,847 credits. Honey, we just won our mortgage payment. I watched them cash out and leave, holding hands and laughing like teenagers. The number stuck in my head, 1,847. Exactly what I needed for rent. By 6 o'clock, I was down to 180 credits. Still ahead of my original investment, but not making the kind of progress I needed. The eviction deadline was Monday at 5, less than 24 hours away. I'd been playing conservatively, betting 5 and 10 credits at a time. But conservative play meant conservative returns. If I wanted to reach 1,067 credits by tonight, I needed to be more aggressive. The cocktail service had changed shifts. A younger woman named Tiffany brought me another beer without being asked. The casino was filling up with the evening crowd. People getting off work, couples out for dinner and entertainment. Having a good day? Tiffany asked. Getting there, I said, though my credit total suggested otherwise. I finished the beer and switched to 20 credit bets. Each hand now represented $100, more money than Sarah made in tips on a good night. But the potential payouts were proportionally larger. A full house would pay 180 credits, or $900.1 good hand could put me over the top, at 7 o'clock. I cashed out my video poker credits with $290 in my pocket, $90 ahead of my starting point, but nowhere near my goal. The machine had been tight all evening, giving me just enough small wins to keep playing, but never the big hand I needed. Walking through the casino, I noticed the table games for the first time. Blackjack, roulette, craps. Games I'd only seen in movies, surrounded by players who looked serious and focused. A blackjack table near the bar had 3 players and an empty seat. The minimum bet sign said $10, and the dealer was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and quick hands. Her name tag said Patricia. I'd played blackjack at kitchen tables during college, penny-ante games where nobody cared about strategy. But I knew the basics. Get as close to 21 as possible without going over. Beat the dealer's hand. Can I sit down? Of course, honey. First time playing blackjack. I nodded and put $290 on the table. Patricia exchanged it for chips, red $5 chips and green $25 chips. The weight and feel of real casino chips was different from the plastic ones we'd used in college. More substantial, more serious. Minimum bet is $10, Patricia explained. You can bet anywhere from 10 to 500 per hand. The other players welcomed me with nods and advice. Frank, a retiree in a Cardinals cap, explained basic strategy. Tessa, a woman about my age, showed me hand signals for hitting and standing. A quiet man in work clothes named Miguel just nodded hello and focused on his cards that I started with $15 bets, feeling my way into the game. Patricia dealt from a shoe containing multiple decks, explaining casino rules as we played. Unlike video poker, this felt social, a shared experience with other players against the house. My first hand was a 16 against Patricia's 7. Frank whispered, hit, and I took another card. A 4 for 20. Patricia revealed 17. I won. The next hand was blackjack, ace and jack. Patricia paid me $22.50 for my $15 bet. In 2 hands, I'd won $37.50. This felt different from video poker. More skill-based, more social, more alive. The other players celebrated my wins and commiserated with my losses. When Patricia went on a hot streak, dealing herself 20 and 21 repeatedly, we suffered together. By 8:30, I'd built my chip stack to $475. The rhythm of the game was hypnotic. Cards dealt, decisions made, money won or lost. Patricia kept the pace steady but unhurried, explaining decisions when I hesitated. You're doing good for a first-timer, Frank said during a shuffle break. Most people bet too much too fast. I was betting between $15 and $25 per hand, staying conservative while I learned. But watching my chip stack grow, I started thinking about bigger bets. At this rate, I might actually reach my goal. When Patricia announced her break, Frank mentioned that the evening dealers were usually looser with the rules. Kevin's coming on next. He's good people. I checked my phone. 8:47 p.m. Sarah had texted twice asking how I was feeling. I'd been so focused on the cards that I'd forgotten to respond. Still sick, I texted back. Sleeping most of the day. Love you. Another lie, but a necessary one. By tomorrow night, it wouldn't matter. Kevin replaced Patricia at 9 o'clock sharp. He was younger, maybe 30, with faster hands and less conversation. The table's energy shifted, more serious, more businesslike. Evening, folks. We're switching to a fresh shoe. Kevin's dealing pace was noticeably quicker than Patricia's. Cards flew across the felt with practiced efficiency, forcing faster decisions. The social atmosphere changed too. Less chatting, more focus on the cards. My phone buzzed with another text from Sarah. Property manager called. Wants to confirm payment tomorrow by 5 p.m. Are you sure you're okay? I stared at the message for a long moment. The artificial deadline I'd created was real now. Monday at 5, or eviction proceedings would begin. Even if I won the money tonight, I'd have to explain where it came from. I silenced my phone and focused on the cards. Kevin dealt me 11 against his 6 showing. A perfect double-down situation. I could double my bet and take exactly one more card. I pushed out another $25 chip, doubling my bet to $50. Kevin dealt me a 9 for 20. Then he flipped his whole card, a 10 for 16, and drew a 7. 23. Bust. I won $50 on one hand, bringing my chip stack to $525. The rush was different from video poker wins. More immediate, more social, more real. Frank and Tessa had left, replaced by players who bet larger amounts and talked less. A woman in a business suit was betting $100 per hand. A man my father's age played 2 hands simultaneously, $500 in action every deal. I felt like I'd been promoted to a more serious level of the game. Kevin treated all players the same, professional courtesy without Patricia's warmth, but efficient and fair. By 10 o'clock, I'd pushed my total to $680. Still short of my goal, but making steady progress. The key was staying patient, betting conservatively, letting good cards and basic strategy do the work, but conservative bets meant conservative progress. At $25 per hand, I needed to win a lot more hands than I lost to reach $1,067. The math was getting tight with time running out. I increased my base bet to $50. Double the risk, double the reward. Kevin dealt the cards with the same efficient rhythm, but now each decision mattered twice as much. $50 wins felt substantial. $50 losses hurt more than they should have. The emotional swings got bigger with the bet sizes. But the potential for reaching my goal improved. A new player sat down at third base, an older woman named Dolores who watched my betting with concern. Steady wins the race. Honey, she said after I pushed out a $75 bet. I've seen good players get hot and then get reckless. I nodded politely, but kept my bet where it was. Dolores hadn't seen my calculations or understood my deadline. This wasn't recklessness. This was mathematics under pressure. By 11 o'clock, I'd reached $850. Closer, but not close enough. The casino was fuller now, weekend evening crowd mixing with serious players. The noise level had increased, but the blackjack table remained an island of focus. Kevin mentioned that the high-limit area had better rules and bigger table limits. If you're looking to play bigger, that's where the real action is. I looked at my chip stack. $850 was more money than I'd ever had in chips, but it still wasn't enough. The high-limit room sounded like the next logical step. My phone buzzed just as Kevin dealt me pocket aces. Sarah's text lit up the screen. "Where are you?" "Property manager's office closed at 5. Called 3 times. The words hit me like cold water. I'd been so focused on cards and chips that I'd forgotten the artificial deadline I'd created in my head. Monday at 5 p.m. had come and gone hours ago. Even if I won every dollar I needed tonight, the property management office wouldn't open until Tuesday morning. This should have been the moment I left. Cashed out my $850, drove home, faced the consequences like an adult. We'd figure something out together, payment plans, extensions, borrowing from someone. Instead, I stared at the aces and felt the walls closing in. If we were going to face eviction anyway, what was the point of conservative play? The original goal had been $867 to make rent. Now I needed enough to catch up on everything: rent, late fees, utilities, car payment. "You in?" Kevin asked, waiting for my bet decision. I doubled down, pushing out another $100. Kevin dealt me a 9 for 20. The dealer showed 16 and busted. I won $200 in one hand. My phone buzzed again. "Nathaniel, please call me. I'm worried." I silenced the phone and slipped it into my pocket. Sarah would understand once this was over. Once I walked through our front door with enough money to solve all our problems instead of just some of them. The new math was simple. Get to $2,000 and we could pay everything current. Rent, utilities, car insurance, groceries for a month. Instead of barely surviving until the next crisis, we'd have breathing room. I raised my base bet to $75. The chip stack in front of me was the largest I'd ever seen. $1,050 after the double down win. But it still wasn't enough to transform our situation completely. Dolores watched me push out the larger bet with disapproval. "Honey, I've been coming here 15 years. The house always gets its money back. I'm not like other players," I said. "I understand the math." She shook her head sadly. "That's what they all say." Kevin dealt the cards with mechanical precision. My $75 bet won, then lost, then won again. The swings were bigger now, but the trend was upward. By midnight, I'd reached $1,200. The casino had filled with the late-night crowd. People getting off second shift, couples out for weekend entertainment, serious players settling in for long sessions. Everyone looked comfortable here, like this was normal Saturday night activity. That I was no longer a tourist. I belonged at this table, understood the rhythm, knew when to hit and when to stand. The math was working exactly as I'd planned. Kevin announced the shift change at 1 a.m. "Michelle's taking over in the high-limit room if anyone wants to move up." I looked at my chips. $1,200 in red and green stacks. Close to my goal, but not quite there. What's the minimum in high limit? $25. Better rules, higher maximums. The invitation felt like a promotion. The high-limit area was separated from the main casino floor by frosted glass and softer lighting. The carpet was thicker, the chairs more comfortable, the atmosphere more refined. This wasn't where tourists and casual players came to waste $20. This was where serious money changed hands. Michelle was elegant in a way that made the other dealers look ordinary. Late 30s, perfectly styled hair, movements that spoke of years dealing to players who bet more in a hand than most people made in a week. "Good evening. First time in high limit." I nodded, feeling suddenly underdressed despite my clean shirt and best jeans. The other players looked different here. Expensive watches, designer clothes. The confidence that came with having real money. "Minimum bet is 25. Maximum is 500 per hand," Michelle explained as I sat down. "We use different chips here. Blacks are hundreds, purples are 500s. She exchanged my red and green chips for black ones, then added some purple. Suddenly, I was holding $1,200 in chips that felt substantial, important. The weight was different, the colors more serious. I started with $50 bets, feeling my way into this new environment. The pace was slower than the main floor, more deliberate. Players took time with their decisions, and Michelle waited patiently for each choice. Insurance. She asked when her up card was an ace that I declined, and she revealed blackjack. My $50 bet disappeared, but the loss felt manageable given the size of my stack. The swings were more dramatic here. Win 50 and you'd gained real money. Lose 50 and you felt it. But the potential rewards justified the higher stakes. A blackjack paid $75 instead of the $37.50 I'd been winning on the main floor, by 2 a.m. I'd built my stack to $1,650. The goal was within reach now, just $350 more, and I could pay everything current. Give us the fresh start we needed. A cocktail waitress offered me another beer. I'd lost count of how many I'd had, but the alcohol helped steady my nerves. The decisions felt clearer, the math simpler. Michelle dealt with professional courtesy that bordered on warmth. When I made good decisions, she nodded approvingly. When I hit 21, she congratulated me quietly. The service felt personal, like she wanted me to succeed. "You're playing well tonight," she said during a shuffle break. Smart, patient play. The compliment felt better than any I'd received at work. Michelle dealt to serious players every night. Her approval meant I belonged here. Understood what I was doing. I increased my bets to $75, then $100. Each win brought me closer to complete financial freedom. Each loss was just a temporary setback on the way to solving all our problems. The other players came and went, but I stayed focused on my mission. An older man in an expensive suit won $3,000 and left. A woman about Sarah's age lost twice that and walked away looking devastated. I was different. I had discipline, a plan, a specific goal. When I reached $2,000, I'd cash out and drive home victorious. By 3 a.m., I'd reached $1,800. So close I could taste it. Just two more good hands, and I'd have enough to transform our entire situation. Michelle's eyes showed a flicker of something. Concern, maybe, or recognition. She'd probably seen this exact scenario play out hundreds of times. But she kept dealing, and I kept playing, confident that the next hand would be the one that changed everything. "Insurance?" Michelle asked, her ace of hearts glowing under the high-limit room's soft lighting. I looked at my cards. 19 with a king and 9. A strong hand, but vulnerable to blackjack. Insurance would cost half my $100 bet, $50 to protect against Michelle's potential 21. "No insurance," I said, remembering basic strategy. Insurance was a sucker bet, mathematically unfavorable over time. Michelle flipped her whole card with practiced efficiency. Jack of spades. Blackjack. My $100 bet disappeared, but the loss felt manageable. I had $1,700 left, and one unlucky hand didn't change the fundamental math. I just needed to stay patient and let probability work in my favor. The next hand was another blackjack for Michelle. Then a 20 when I had 19. Then another blackjack. 3 hands. $300 gone. My stack dropped to $1,400, then $1,100 after 2 more losses. The alcohol in my system was making it harder to think clearly, but the basic strategy remained sound. Hit 16 against a 10, stand on 17 or higher, double down on 11. "Rough run," Michelle said sympathetically. "Happens to everyone." But it kept happening. Michelle dealt herself 21 after 21, or 20 when I had 19, or 19 when I had 18. The mathematical improbability of the streak felt personal. Like the casino had decided I wasn't supposed to win. My chip stack fell to $800. Then $600. Each loss stung more than the last. Not just because of the money, but because of how close I'd been to my goal. 15 minutes ago, I'd needed 2 good hands to reach $2,000. Now I needed a miracle, just to get back to break even. A new player sat down. A woman in her 50s wearing a business suit and a Rolex. She bought in for $5,000, betting $200 per hand like it was pocket change. "First time in high limit?" she asked, noticing my smaller chip stack. "Yeah, having a rough stretch. The key is bankroll management," she said. "Never bet more than you can afford to lose completely." Good advice, but I was way past that point. The money in front of me wasn't entertainment budget. It was grocery money, gas money, our last chance to avoid eviction. By 4 a.m. I was down to $400, still ahead of my original $200 investment. But the psychological impact of losing $1,400 in 2 hours was devastating. The goal had shifted from winning big to just surviving until my luck turned that I lowered my bets to $25, the table minimum. Conservative play to weather the storm until the cards started cooperating again. But the storm didn't end. Michelle dealt herself another blackjack, then 20 when I had 19. The woman in the business suit won consistently, her large bankroll allowing her to ride out the dealer's hot streak. My phone had been buzzing periodically with texts from Sarah. I'd stopped looking at them hours ago. Afraid to see the worry and confusion in her messages, the cocktail service brought me another beer without being asked. The alcohol was making everything feel distant and dreamlike, but it also numbed the growing panic about what I was doing. $400 left. Enough for 16 more minimum bets, if I could make them last. The night that had started with mathematical certainty was turning into mathematical impossibility, but I'd come too far to quit now. One good hand could turn everything around. Double whiskey on the house, the cocktail waitress said, setting down a glass filled with amber liquid. Compliments of the high-limit room. I hadn't ordered whiskey, but the gesture felt generous. The casino taking care of a valued customer, recognizing my loyalty and commitment to the game. The whiskey burned going down, but it warmed my empty stomach and dulled the sharp edges of frustration. I hadn't eaten since breakfast, 12 hours ago, before this had all started. The alcohol hit harder than it should have, amplifying emotions that were already running high. My chip stack had dwindled to $320. Each $25 loss brought me closer to the mathematical edge where recovery became impossible. But the whiskey made the math feel less urgent, less final. Michelle dealt another round. I had 16 against her 10, a classic hitting situation. I took a card and busted with a 7. Another $25 gone. The frustration boiled over. How was it possible for a dealer to run this hot for this long? In 3 hours, Michelle had dealt herself more blackjacks and 20s than probability should allow. The game felt rigged, unfair, deliberately designed to take my money. I increased my bet to $50. If the cards were going to be cruel, I needed bigger payouts when they finally cooperated. Conservative play was just slow death at this point. $50 losses hurt more than $25 losses. The psychological impact was larger, the sense of time running out more acute. My stack dropped to $270, then $220, then $170. The woman in the business suit had won nearly $2,000 and left, cashing out with a satisfied smile. Other players rotated through the table, some winning, some losing, but none seeming as desperate as I felt. Maybe take a break, Michelle suggested quietly. Get some food, clear your head. But taking a break meant accepting that the night was over, that I'd failed to solve our problems. Sarah was probably awake now, checking her phone, wondering why I hadn't responded to her messages. I pushed out $75, more than a quarter of my remaining stack. If I won, I'd have breathing room to continue. If I lost, I'd be close to the end. Michelle dealt me 13 against her king. I hit and drew an 8 for 21. The relief was overwhelming. Finally, a good card when I needed it most. But the win only brought my total back to $245. I needed to win consistently now, not just occasionally. The margin for error had disappeared completely. My phone buzzed again. I pulled it out and saw 4 missed calls from Sarah, all within the last hour. The most recent text said, "Nathaniel, please call me. I'm scared." The words cut through the whiskey fog. Sarah was home alone, worried about me, probably thinking I was sick or hurt or worse. While I sat in a casino chasing money we didn't have, she was facing our problems by herself. I should have called her back. Should have told her where I was, what I was doing, how close I'd come to solving everything. But I was too deep in the hole to think clearly about anything except the next hand. The whiskey made everything feel possible and impossible at the same time. The logical part of my brain knew I was in trouble, but the desperate part kept insisting that one good run could fix everything. I bet $100 on the next hand, nearly half my remaining stack, all or nothing, was starting to feel like the only option left. My phone rang just as Michelle dealt the cards. Sarah's ringtone cut through the casino noise like an alarm. I looked at my $100 bet, looked at the phone, and made a choice that would haunt me for months. I need to take this, I told Michelle, gathering my chips. The casino bathroom was quieter, but still buzzed with the distant sound of slot machines. I stared at myself in the mirror, bloodshot eyes, rumpled clothes, the hollow look of someone who'd been awake too long and thinking too hard. Sarah, Nathaniel, where are you? I've been calling for hours. Her voice was strained, worried, with an edge of panic I'd never heard before. Standing in that bathroom, surrounded by marble and gold fixtures that probably cost more than our monthly rent, I realized how far I'd drifted from reality. I went for a drive. Needed to clear my head about the money situation. It's 3 in the morning. I've been worried sick. I know. I'm sorry. My phone was on silent. I called the property manager again. Mrs. Patterson said she'd accept payment Tuesday morning if we pay an additional $200 late fee. That means we need $2,047 instead of $1,847. But at least we have until Tuesday. The news should have been good. More time to solve our problem. But it also meant my original calculations were wrong. Instead of needing $867 more, we needed $1,067. The goal had moved further away just as my resources were disappearing. That's good news. I managed. I talked to my sister Jennifer. She can't lend us the full amount, but she might be able to send $500 if we pay her back over 6 months. And I picked up 2 more shifts this week. We can do this, Nathaniel. We can figure it out together. Sarah sounded hopeful, energetic, like she'd been awake all night solving problems while I'd been awake all night creating new ones. She had a plan, people to call, shifts to work. Real solutions based on real work. Where are you exactly? She asked. You sound different. I stared at my reflection again. The man looking back was a stranger, someone who lied to his girlfriend, who gambled rent money, who sat in casino bathrooms at 3 a.m., pretending everything was under control, just driving around, thinking, come home, please. We'll figure this out in the morning. I'll be home soon. How soon? I want to see you, make sure you're okay. I looked at the $170 in chips in my pocket. Not enough to solve anything, but maybe enough for one last chance at redemption. If I could just get back to $1,067, none of these lies would matter. An hour, maybe 2. I need to finish driving, clear my head completely. Nathaniel, you're scaring me. Just come home now. I love you. I said, which was true. Everything's going to be okay. Which wasn't that I hung up and walked back to the high-limit table where Michelle was dealing to empty seats. My $100 bet was still there, waiting for me to return and make the decision that would determine whether the night ended in triumph or disaster. The bathroom conversation with Sarah should have been a wake-up call. She had hope, plans, real solutions. I had $170 in chips and a growing certainty that everything was about to fall apart. But I sat back down at the table anyway. Because admitting failure meant going home empty-handed and confessing everything to the woman I loved, I returned to find Michelle dealing to an empty table. My $100 bet still waiting in the betting circle. The high-limit room had emptied except for one other player at the far end, methodically feeding $500 chips into his betting spot. Everything okay? Michelle asked as I sat down. I nodded and looked at my cards. 12 against her 10 showing. The worst possible situation in blackjack. Too low to stand, too high to hit safely. Basic strategy said to hit and hope for a small card. I hit and drew a jack. 22. Bust. The $100 disappeared, leaving me with $70 in chips. Not enough for another hand at the table minimum. Not enough to continue playing. Barely enough to buy gas for the drive home. I'm sorry, Michelle said quietly, sweeping away the cards. Her expression showed something I hadn't seen before, genuine sympathy, maybe even concern that I should have left then. Cashed out the $70, driven home, told Sarah some version of the truth. But sitting there with less than the cost of dinner and chips, the full weight of the night crashed down on me. That I'd started with $200 and a simple plan. Turn grocery money into rent money. For 8 hours, that plan had seemed not just possible, but inevitable. I'd reached $1,800, been 50 hands away from complete financial freedom. Now I had $70 and a growing certainty that I'd destroyed something important between Sarah and me. The lies, the missed calls, the way her voice had sounded scared and confused on the phone. Can I get change for the main floor? I asked Michelle. She exchanged my black chips for red ones without comment. $70 became 14 red chips. Enough for maybe 20 minutes at a $5 blackjack table. The main floor felt different at 4 a.m. Mostly empty except for the hardcore slot players and a few die-hard table game enthusiasts. The energy was desperate rather than hopeful. People chasing losses rather than celebrating wins. That I found a $5 table with a tired-looking dealer named Gary. Middle-aged, overweight, the kind of guy who'd probably been dealing cards longer than I'd been alive. "How's your night going?" he asked as I sat down. "Could be better. I bet all $70 on one hand. If I won, I'd have $140, still nowhere near enough to matter, but something to build on. If I lost, the night would be officially over." Gary dealt me 12 against his 10. The same situation I'd faced with Michelle, the same terrible odds. This time I stood, hoping he'd bust. He flipped his whole card, a 6 for 16, then drew a 5 for 21. The $70 disappeared, and with it, any possibility of recovery. I sat at the table for 5 more minutes, staring at the empty betting circle, not quite ready to accept that it was over. Gary dealt to the other players and ignored me, professional enough to recognize when someone was done for the night. The casino's background music seemed louder now, more insistent. Designed to keep people playing who still had money to lose. That I walked through the main floor toward the exit, past rows of slot machines and the few remaining players still feeding bills into the machines. The carpet felt different under my feet, less welcoming, more worn. Outside, the parking lot was mostly empty. Dawn was still 2 hours away, but the sky had that pre-dawn grayness that made everything look tired. And my truck started on the second try. And I sat there for a minute looking back at the Riverbell Casino. 8 hours ago, it had looked like salvation. Now it just looked like a building where I'd lost more than money. The drive home would take 40 minutes if I was lucky with traffic. My gas gauge showed less than a quarter tank, and my wallet was empty except for some loose change that I'd promised myself I'd leave once I was ahead. Instead, I was leaving without gas money to drive home. The gas light came on 15 miles from home, glowing orange on the dashboard like an accusation. I'd been watching the needle drop since leaving the casino parking lot, hoping it would last long enough to get me to familiar territory. Highway 78 was empty at 4:30 a.m. except for a few long-haul truckers and people like me, making drives they'd rather not explain to anyone. The radio played country songs about heartbreak and bad decisions, which felt appropriate, but didn't help my mood. That I had $2.47 in loose change from my truck's ashtray and cup holders. Enough to buy a gallon of gas if I could find a station that still accepted cash for small amounts. Most places required credit cards for anything under $5. The math of the evening played on repeat in my head. Started with $200, reached $1,800, ended with nothing. A $1,600 swing that had lasted 8 hours and felt like 8 years. If I'd quit when I was ahead, really ahead, not just temporarily winning, we'd have had enough money to pay rent and buy groceries for a month. Instead, we were worse off than when I'd started. Not only did we still owe $1,847 in back rent, but we'd lost the $200 we'd set aside for food. The grocery money Sarah thought was still in my wallet, part of her careful calculations about how we'd survive until my next paycheck. My phone sat silent on the passenger seat. 3 missed calls from Sarah since our bathroom conversation, but I couldn't bring myself to look at the messages. What was I supposed to tell her? That I'd spent grocery money at a casino? That I'd been lying about where I was and what I was doing? The Murphy's Gas and Go appeared like a mirage on the horizon. I pulled in and checked the price, $3.89 per gallon. My $2.47 would buy maybe half a gallon, enough to get me home if I was lucky. I wasn't working the overnight shift. A younger guy with neck tattoos and tired eyes processed my transaction without comment. $2.47 in quarters, dimes, and nickels, counted out on the counter like a child buying candy. "Pump 4, he said, handing me the receipt. Half a gallon of gas barely moved the needle, but it was enough to get me to my driveway. The sun was starting to rise as I pulled onto Maple Street, painting the sky pink and orange like everything was going to be beautiful and hopeful. Our duplex looked smaller in the dawn light. Paint peeling around the windows, grass that needed cutting. The orange eviction notice no longer taped to the door. Sarah must have brought it inside. Her car was in the driveway, which meant she was awake and waiting. The lights were on in our bedroom and kitchen, and I could see her silhouette moving around inside that I sat in my truck for 5 minutes, trying to figure out what to say. How do you explain that you drove to a casino with grocery money and came home empty-handed? How do you tell someone who works 2 jobs and never complains that you'd gambled away her carefully saved tip money? The front door opened, and Sarah stepped onto the porch, wearing the old robe she'd had since college. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the relief and worry mixing on her face. She'd been awake all night while I was lying to her and losing money we couldn't afford to lose. She'd made plans, called her sister, figured out solutions to problems I'd been making worse. I turned off the engine and walked toward our front door, where the woman I loved was waiting for explanations I didn't know how to give. The casino felt like a different world now, something that had happened to someone else. But the empty wallet in my pocket and the lies I'd have to tell were entirely real. Sarah opened the door before I could reach for my keys. Her eyes were red from crying, exhaustion, or both. She looked me up and down like she was checking for injuries, trying to understand what had happened to the man who'd left yesterday afternoon. "You smell like cigarettes. And beer." I'd forgotten about the casino's atmosphere, how it clung to your clothes and hair like evidence. I stopped at a bar. Needed to think. For 8 hours. We stood in our living room, the same space where I'd opened the eviction notice 3 days ago. But everything felt different now. Smaller, more fragile, like the wrong word might break something irreparable. I was driving around, trying to figure out our money situation. Stopped for a drink and lost track of time. Sarah sat down heavily in her chair, the one she'd inherited from her grandmother. I made a list of everyone we could ask for help. Called 3 people while you were out there thinking. "Do you want to see what I figured out?" She handed me a notebook page covered in her careful handwriting. Names, phone numbers, potential loan amounts, repayment schedules. A real plan based on real relationships and honest conversations. Jennifer can send 500 if we pay her back over 6 months. Mrs. Chun needs her gutters cleaned and will pay 150. The diner might advance me against future tips if I ask nicely. I stared at the list, seeing solutions I'd been too proud or too stupid to consider. People who cared about us, small jobs I could do, ways to bridge the gap without risking everything on cards and chance. "This is good," I managed. "Really good. Where's the grocery money?" The question I'd been dreading since pulling into the driveway. Sarah's careful budget depended on every dollar being where it was supposed to be. The $200 I'd taken to the casino was supposed to buy food for 2 weeks. I spent some of it. On gas, driving around. How much is left? I reached for my wallet, knowing it was empty, but hoping somehow I'd missed something. A 20 folded behind my driver's license, a 10 hidden in a credit card slot. But there was nothing except receipts and the smell of disappointment. "I'll get more money. Pick up extra work, sell some tools." Sarah's expression shifted from worry to something colder. "Show me your wallet." I handed it over and watched her look through the empty bill compartment. The credit card slots that held only expired insurance cards and business cards from plumbing supply stores. "Nathaniel, where is the money?" The lie I'd been constructing crumbled under her direct gaze. Sarah had been with me for 3 years, through my injury and recovery, through every financial crisis and small victory. She knew my tells, my patterns, the difference between honest mistakes and deliberate deception. I lost it. How do you lose $200? The truth sat in my throat like a stone, too heavy to swallow, too large to spit out. How do you tell someone who trusts you completely that you violated that trust in the worst possible way? I went to the casino. I thought I could turn it into rent money. Sarah stared at me for a long moment, processing words that probably sounded impossible to her. The Nathaniel she knew didn't gamble, didn't lie, didn't risk grocery money on games of chance. The casino. I had a plan, a mathematical plan. I was going to turn 200 into enough to pay the rent. And instead you lost it all. Yes. She stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the sunrise painting our neighbor's house golden. When she turned back, her face showed something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not disappointment, but a kind of cold assessment. "I need you to pack a bag and stay somewhere else for a few days." "Sarah, I can't look at you right now. I can't be in the same room with someone who would gamble away our food money while I was working double shifts and calling everyone I know for help." 6 months later, I was back at the Riverbell Casino, but this time I was carrying a toolbox instead of a wallet. My company had picked up the maintenance contract. And I was there to fix a clogged toilet in the men's room near the high-limit area. Working in that bathroom, I could hear the distant sound of slot machines and chips clicking on felt. The same sounds that had seemed so promising 8 months ago now just sounded like noise that I finished the job efficiently, the way I'd always done. Fixed the problem, cleaned up my tools, submitted the paperwork. The kind of honest work I should have trusted from the beginning. Sarah and I had worked things out, eventually. Found a cheaper apartment, rebuilt our savings slowly, learned to talk about money and problems and the difference between taking chances and taking risks. But standing in that casino bathroom, listening to the sounds of people hoping to change their luck with mathematics and wishful thinking, I understood something I should have known from the start. Some problems don't have shortcuts. Some things can only be fixed the hard way, one honest choice at a time. The 3 days at my brother Tom's house in the next county felt like exile. His couch was lumpy. His kids asked uncomfortable questions about why Uncle Nathaniel was staying over. And his wife Linda made polite conversation while clearly wishing I'd figure out my life somewhere else. Tom had always been the responsible one. Steady job at the power company. Mortgage payments made on time. Family vacations planned a year in advance. He listened to my story with the patient expression of someone who'd watched me make questionable decisions before, but never anything this destructive. "How much did you actually lose?" he asked on the second night, after his family had gone to bed. "Everything I went in with. $200. No, I mean total. From the beginning." I thought about it. The scratch-offs, the video poker at Murphy's, the 8 hours at River Bell. Maybe $350 for 100 total. Jesus, Nathaniel. Sarah's working 2 jobs, and you're pissing away money at a casino. Hearing it from someone else made it sound worse, more selfish. Tom had never struggled the way Sarah and I had. He didn't understand what it felt like to watch everything you'd built slowly crumble despite working as hard as you could. But he was right about the selfishness. While Sarah had been making lists and calling people and figuring out real solutions, I'd been sitting at blackjack tables convincing myself I was solving our problems. "What's your plan now?" Tom asked. "Go home. Apologize. Try to fix things." "That's not a plan. That's wishful thinking." "What are you going to do about the rent? About the lying? About whatever made you think gambling was a good idea in the first place?" I didn't have answers to those questions. For 3 days, I'd been avoiding them, hoping Sarah would cool down and let me come home so we could pretend this had never happened. But on Thursday morning, Sarah called. Her voice was calm but distant, like she was talking to a stranger. "I talked to Mrs. Patterson. She'll accept $800 now and let us pay the rest over 3 months. Jennifer sent $500, I worked extra shifts, and Mrs. Chun paid me for cleaning her gutters." She'd solved our crisis while I sat on my brother's couch feeling sorry for myself. She found real solutions through work and honest conversations with people who cared about us. "I also looked at our bank account," she continued. "The ATM withdrawals, the cash advances. This wasn't just one night at a casino, was it?" My stomach dropped. I'd forgotten the paper trail. "I found the scratch-offs in your toolbox. The receipt from Murphy's gas station. This has been going on for weeks." Every lie, every hidden loss, was laid out in front of her. "I want you to come home Friday. We need to talk about whether this relationship has a future." She hung up, leaving me staring at Tom's phone and finally understanding I might have broken something beyond repair. The drive home Friday felt longer than the 40-minute trip to River Bell a week earlier. Back then, I carried hope and certainty. Now, only consequences. Sarah sat at our kitchen table when I walked in. Papers were spread out. Bank statements, a payment plan, and a printed article about gambling addiction. "Sit down," she said. She didn't look up as she spoke. "I paid the rent. $800 now, the rest over 3 months. We're not getting evicted." "Thank you. I know you didn't have to. You're right. I didn't. I did it because I love our life together, even if I'm not sure I love what you've become." She pushed the highlighted bank statements toward me. $437. That's what you lost, not the $200 you told Tom. The real number hit me like a punch. That was groceries, a car payment, Sarah's tips from 2 weeks of double shifts. I was trying to solve our problems. By lying to me every day? By gambling away money we needed to survive? I wanted to explain, but sitting across from her, excuses collapsed under the weight of her disappointment. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "I want you to get help." She pointed at the article on Gamblers Anonymous. "I'm not like these people," I muttered. You lied to me for weeks. You gambled away rent money. What would you call that? Her voice was firm. This isn't negotiable. You go to meetings, figure out why you did this, or we're done. I won't live with someone I can't trust. Okay, I said. And you give me your ATM card. I'll handle the money until you prove you can be trusted again. Handing it over hurt worse than anything else. But I knew trust had to be rebuilt through actions, not words. The first Gamblers Anonymous meeting was Tuesday. I sat in my truck outside for 10 minutes, trying to convince myself I didn't belong. But I did. When they asked if anyone wanted to share, I stood up. I'm Nathaniel, and I think I might have a gambling problem. It was the first honest thing I'd said about gambling since that scratch-off at Murphy's gas station.